The laughter struck like a whip. Sharp. Cutting. It echoed through the chandelier-lit room and rattled against the crystal glasses that lined the dinner table. The wealthy woman's words, dripping with disdain, hung heavy in the air. "Did you borrow that from a thrift store?" she asked, her voice ringing with mockery. For a moment, the entire table froze. And then, like a cruel wave breaking against the shore, the guests erupted in laughter. Some covered their mouths with delicate hands. Others leaned back, chuckling freely, eager to please the woman at the head of the table. But not everyone laughed. A few guests shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting toward the young black girl who sat quietly, hands folded on her lap. She did not laugh. She did not answer. Her gaze dropped to the dress she wore, simple, unadorned, yet stitched with the care of someone who poured love into every thread. The seams held the memory of her grandmother, who had sewn it with patient hands, each stitch a story, each fold a prayer. The girl's fingers tightened around the fabric, as if drawing strength from the one who had given it life. The wealthy woman smirked, her diamonds glinting under the golden lights. She leaned back in her chair, pleased with herself, basking in the control she held over the room. It was not just a dress she had mocked, it was dignity, it was heritage, it was love made visible. Yet she thought she had reduced it to a joke. Her laughter rang louder than the music, louder than the clinking glasses. It was the kind of laughter meant to remind everyone of their place. The girl did not answer. She did not defend herself. Her silence was heavy, deliberate, unsettling. She lifted her eyes, just for a second, and in that glance was something the wealthy woman had not expected. Steadiness. A quiet fire that did not burn outward but smoldered deep within. The girl's hands trembled slightly against the fabric of her dress, but her eyes did not waver. The guests shifted again. Some of them looked away, ashamed to be part of the cruel performance. Others leaned in closer, waiting for the girl to crack, waiting for her to protest, to plead, to give them another reason to laugh. But she did not. The silence grew louder, pressing against every corner of the room, until the laughter began to die down, replaced with nervous coughs and the clink of cutlery. The wealthy woman cleared her throat, as if to reclaim control of the moment. "Well," she said, her voice tight with amusement, "I suppose it's charming in its own way." She waved her jeweled hand dismissively and reached for her wine glass, certain she had won. But something about the girl's silence gnawed at the edges of the room. It was as if her refusal to break, her refusal to bend under the weight of humiliation, unsettled even the most comfortable guest. For the first time that evening, the wealthy woman's victory did not feel complete. The girl closed her eyes briefly, breathing slowly, gathering herself. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Clothes do not make you worthy. Love does. Respect does. Dignity does. Wear this with pride, child, for it carries more than fabric. It carries who you are." She straightened in her seat, her back tall, her hands steady now. She did not speak, but her silence had become defiance. The wealthy woman caught it. For a moment, her smirk faltered. She saw something she had not expected in that girl's stillness. Strength. A strength that could not be mocked away. A strength that was not bought with money or wrapped in jewels, but built from something deeper, older, unshakable. And though no one else in the room could put words to it, they felt it too. The energy shifted, just slightly, but enough to leave the wealthy woman unsettled. She took a sip of her wine, her eyes darting briefly to the girl and then away again, as if to remind herself that she still held power. The dinner continued, but something had changed. The music played on. Plates of delicacies were served, but the taste had soured for some. Conversation resumed, but the echoes of that cruel laugh lingered, refusing to be forgotten. The girl's silence clung to the room like a shadow, a promise that this night was not finished, that the story had only just begun. For the audience, the hook was set. We had seen the power imbalance, the cruelty, the humiliation. But we had also seen the seed of dignity planted in the quiet strength of a girl mocked for the very thing that carried her grandmother's love. And in that seed, there was something the wealthy woman could not predict, something that would soon turn her laughter into silence of her own. Because before the night was over, the truth, a truth long buried, a truth stitched in the very fabric of that dress, would rise. And when it did, it would not be the girl who was left humiliated. It would be the woman who had mocked her. The camera, if it were a film, would linger once more on the girl's face, calm but resolute, before fading into the glittering lights above the dinner table. The night was not yet done. The story was only beginning. And as the wealthy woman lifted her glass, unaware of the storm that was coming, the audience would know. Her words, meant to humiliate, would soon come back to haunt her. The music played on, but the room had changed. What was once a glittering dinner filled with polite conversation now carried an undercurrent of tension, sharp and uneasy. The wealthy woman, seated at the head of the table with her jeweled hands resting on polished silverware, still wore that smirk of superiority, but her eyes, darting now and then toward the young black girl in the handmade dress, betrayed a flicker of discomfort. Something about that silence, that refusal to break, unsettled her. She would not allow it. So she pressed harder. Between courses, while servants moved quietly around the table with trays of food, she leaned forward and let her words drip like venom. "You know," she said with a feigned softness that fooled no one, "in circles like these, appearances matter. People here notice everything. The dress you wear says a lot about where you belong." The girl lifted her gaze, meeting her eyes just briefly. Still. Silent. The wealthy woman's smirk twitched, then grew sharper. She would not be ignored. The guests chuckled nervously, some nodding along to appease her. One woman at the far end of the table murmured agreement, though her eyes betrayed pity. Others shifted in their seats, stealing glances at the girl, waiting for her to crack. The wealthy woman thrived on this performance, on the applause of cruelty dressed as wit. The young girl, however, sat with her hands folded over the fabric of her dress. Every thread, every seam, carried her grandmother's touch, her love, her resilience. Though her cheeks burned under the weight of ridicule, she remained composed. She had been raised to endure moments like these, not to collapse under them. The wealthy woman, unsatisfied with silence, pressed again. She gestured with her jeweled bracelet clinking softly. "I suppose it's not your fault. You just don't know. People like us, we dress to impress. It's a language, a sign of sophistication. Maybe one day, if you work hard enough, you'll understand." The cruelty was subtle, but deliberate. Her words cut deep, meant not just to embarrass, but to remind the girl of her supposed place in this hierarchy. Her wealth was her armor, her power, and in her mind, this girl had none. The laughter rippled again, though weaker this time. It was no longer the free, roaring laughter of the first humiliation. It was strained, forced, uncomfortable. Some guests shifted their glasses, sipping wine to avoid joining in. The humiliation hung in the air like smoke, suffocating. The girl's heart pounded, but she drew strength from her grandmother's voice echoing in her mind. "Hold your head high, child. They can mock your clothes, but they cannot strip your dignity." She straightened in her chair, her hands steady now, her back tall. She said nothing, but her silence began to transform into something else. It was no longer passive. It was deliberate, defiant. The wealthy woman noticed, and it angered her. She was used to people bowing, apologizing, trying to explain themselves when confronted. But this girl refused to play along. That refusal, that quiet dignity, was an insult to the very power she believed she held. "Tell us," the woman said suddenly, her voice carrying across the table. "Where did you find that dress? A second-hand shop? Or maybe, did someone make it for you?" Her tone was mocking, but her eyes gleamed with curiosity, hungry for another laugh at the girl's expense. The girl looked up, her eyes steady. She opened her mouth slightly, as though about to speak, but then stopped. She closed it again, letting the silence return. That silence, heavy and unmoving, was worse than any answer. It unsettled the table. It unsettled her tormentor. Around them, forks scraped plates, wine glasses clinked, and the music played faintly in the background. Yet all anyone could feel was the tension between the two, the wealthy woman pushing, mocking, demanding, and the young girl refusing to bend. The cruel game continued. The woman leaned back, sipping her wine with exaggerated grace. "Charming," she muttered loudly enough for the table to hear. "Truly charming. Perhaps it's the latest rural fashion." A few weak laughs followed, but the humor had soured. The joke no longer landed with the same force. The guests were beginning to feel it, the imbalance, the injustice. Still, the humiliation lingered. The girl sat surrounded by luxury, mocked for her simplicity, her heritage, her grandmother's love. Every chuckle was a cut, every smirk a reminder that in their eyes, wealth determined worth. Yet she did not falter. Her silence, her composure, grew heavier, more powerful. It was becoming clear that the wealthy woman's cruelty was no longer amusing. It was cruel. The longer the girl sat in calm silence, the more the power began to shift. Guests glanced at one another. A few frowned. A man at the far end tapped his glass nervously, unwilling to meet the girl's eyes. And the wealthy woman? She pressed harder, desperate to regain her control, to force the girl into breaking. But deep down, she could feel it. Her laughter was beginning to ring hollow. The more she mocked, the smaller she felt. And the more silent the girl remained, the stronger she seemed. The room, once filled with glittering ease, was now heavy with tension. Every word the wealthy woman spoke was another stone on her own shoulders, and every silent glance from the girl was a reminder that something was building. Something was about to change. The audience feels it too. The injustice has escalated. The girl has endured humiliation after humiliation, but her silence is no longer weakness. It is power. And though the wealthy woman does not yet know it, her mockery will not stand unchallenged. Because soon, the truth will surface. And when it does, the room that once laughed at the girl will be staring wide-eyed at the woman who thought herself untouchable. The music swells faintly, the scene slows, and the tension leaves the audience on edge. Something is about to give. Something is about to be revealed. And the night is far from over. Dessert arrived on gleaming silver trays, carried by silent waiters who moved like shadows through the heavy air. Plates of chocolate soufflé and sugared fruit were placed before the guests, but no one truly cared for sweets anymore. The room was restless, thick with the tension that had been building all evening. Eyes darted between the wealthy woman, still perched on her throne of power at the head of the table, and the young black girl in the handmade dress, who sat quietly, her silence sharper than any words could be. The wealthy woman had continued her game of ridicule throughout the night, sprinkling cruel comments into the air like shards of glass, waiting for the girl to bleed. Yet she did not. And that refusal gnawed at her. So she leaned forward once again, lifting her spoon with a practiced grace, and said, "You never did tell us the story behind that dress. There must be one. Clothes like that don't just appear in places like this." The guests chuckled faintly, though their amusement had grown brittle. The girl, still calm, lowered her gaze to the fabric resting against her knees. She traced one of the stitches with her finger. Tiny, imperfect, but strong. Her grandmother's hands had been old, but steady, each thread pulled tight with love and care. And then, before she could speak, a voice rose from the end of the table. It was an older man, quiet until now, his eyes squinting as he studied the dress more closely. His fork clattered softly onto his plate as recognition flashed across his face. "Wait," he murmured, his voice cutting through the restless silence. "That pattern. I know that fabric. Where did you get that?" The girl looked up, startled. The room shifted as all eyes turned toward her. She hesitated for a moment, then spoke, her voice soft but clear. "My grandmother made this. She stitched it by hand. Every piece. She always said it carried her story, her strength." A hush fell over the table. The older man leaned forward, his breath catching. "Your grandmother. What was her name?" The girl swallowed, her hands tightening around the fabric. "Evelyn. Evelyn Carter." Gasps rippled down the table. A few guests exchanged stunned glances. The wealthy woman's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Her eyes flickered with something she could not hide. Fear. The older man's voice trembled. Evelyn Carter. She used to sew for families in the old neighborhood. She made dresses for your mother. His eyes shifted to the wealthy woman, piercing through her polished facade. Isn't that right? She made dresses for you when you were a child. The room froze. The wealthy woman's face drained of color, her painted smile cracking under the weight of truth. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. The whispers began immediately, soft at first, then louder. Guests leaned toward each other, murmuring the name, recalling the history, piecing together the story that had been buried beneath wealth and diamonds. The girl sat taller now, her silence transformed into power. She did not need to speak. The truth had spoken for her. The very dress that had been mocked and ridiculed was the thread that bound their lives together. Her grandmother, once invisible, once dismissed, had been the very foundation of the wealthy woman's childhood, the hands that clothed her when her family had nothing. The wealthy woman's eyes darted wildly around the table, searching for escape, but none came. Her wealth could not erase the past. Her cruelty could not hide the truth. Every guest now saw her not as untouchable, but as hypocritical. A woman who mocked another for wearing a dress stitched by the same hands that once gave her dignity. The girl lifted her chin, her eyes locking on the woman's. No hatred, no spite, only a quiet strength that cut deeper than any insult could. The silence stretched, and in it lay the reversal of power. The woman who had mocked was now the one exposed. The older man leaned back in his chair, his voice low but heavy with meaning. We all came from somewhere. Some of us just forget. His words lingered in the air like judgment. The guests sat in silence, their soufflés untouched, their eyes fixed on the wealthy woman. She set her glass down, her hand trembling ever so slightly. The diamonds on her wrist caught the light, but they no longer glittered with power. They looked heavy, burdensome, like chains she could not escape. The girl smoothed her dress once more, her heart pounding, but her spirit unshaken. The humiliation had shifted. The laughter had died. And now, the truth stood tall in the center of the room. What began as a night of mockery had turned into a revelation. The wealthy woman, so certain of her superiority, had been stripped of it with a single name, a single memory, a single thread of fabric. And everyone had seen it happen. The camera, if this were a film, would pan slowly across the table, past the stunned faces, the whispered shocks, the lowered eyes of those two ashamed to meet the girl's gaze, before landing on the wealthy woman, frozen, exposed, powerless in the glow of her own shame. The reversal was complete. And though the night was not yet finished, the shift in power was undeniable. The girl had not spoken much. She had not shouted, had not defended herself with anger. She didn't need to. The truth had done the work for her. And now, the wealthy woman's laughter was gone, replaced by silence. A silence she could not control. The tables had turned, and everyone knew it. The silence that followed was deafening. The clinking of silverware had stopped. The soft music that once filled the background now seemed like an intruder in a room where truth had laid itself bare. Every guest sat frozen in place, staring at the wealthy woman who had spent the entire night mocking a handmade dress. A dress stitched by the very woman who had once clothed her in her own days of need. The wealthy woman's hand trembled as she set her wine glass down, the stem clicking against the table louder than she intended. Her face, once painted with confidence and superiority, had gone pale. She glanced around at her guests, desperate for someone, anyone, to laugh, to break the tension, to restore her crumbling control. But no one did. Their eyes had shifted, away from her, toward the young black girl whose silence now spoke louder than any voice. The girl sat tall, her dress glowing under the chandelier's light, no longer a symbol of ridicule but of resilience. Her grandmother's hands, weathered by labor and time, had stitched into a dignity that no cruel laugh could erase. And now, the truth of that dignity had silenced the room. The wealthy woman tried to recover. She forced a smile, brittle and thin, and whispered, I didn't know." But the words were weak, falling flat against the weight of what had been revealed. No apology, no excuse, could erase the cruelty of her laughter or the arrogance of her mockery. The guests shifted, their discomfort plain. Some lowered their eyes, ashamed for having laughed earlier. Others studied the young girl with quiet awe, realizing they had misjudged her. The tables had turned, not through wealth, not through power, but through truth. The girl's eyes remained steady on the woman who had mocked her. She did not gloat. She did not lash out. She didn't need to. Her silence was victory enough. Her grandmother's legacy had spoken for her, unraveling the illusion of superiority that diamonds and silks had tried to create. A heavy pause filled the air before an older woman at the table cleared her throat. Her voice was soft but firm, trembling with emotion. "Respect," she said, her eyes shifting from the girl to the wealthy woman, "is not bought. It is earned. And it is remembered." The wealthy woman closed her eyes, her breath unsteady. Those words cut deeper than the laughter she had once delivered so easily. For the first time in years, she felt the sting of humility. She remembered. She remembered her own childhood, the whispered struggles her family endured, the clothes her mother had folded neatly onto her bed, sewn by Evelyn Carter's steady hands. She had buried that past, covered it with jewels and wealth, hoping no one would ever know. And yet, here it was, returned to her in the form of a young girl's dress, a living reminder of the roots she had tried to erase. Her arrogance shattered, her power exposed. She reached for her napkin, dabbing at the corner of her eyes, her voice breaking as she whispered, I owe your grandmother more than I can ever repay." The girl nodded slightly, her gaze softening but her silence unbroken. She did not need to respond. The truth had already been enough. Around the table, the guests felt the shift. What had begun as a spectacle of humiliation had transformed into a lesson none of them would forget. The wealthy woman, once the center of admiration, now sat small, humbled before the very girl she had tried to disgrace. And the girl, once the target of cruelty, now carried herself with a quiet grace of victory. Not the kind that shouts, but the kind that lingers, unforgettable. The music swelled faintly again, softer now, almost reverent, as if even the notes understood the gravity of what had transpired. Forks lifted hesitantly, but no one truly cared for dessert anymore. The real meal had been the truth served at that table, and it was heavy enough to satisfy every soul present. As the dinner wound to a close, the wealthy woman stood. Her voice wavered, stripped of arrogance, bare and trembling. "I mocked what I should have honored," she said, "and I forgot where I came from. For that, I am ashamed." Her eyes fell on the girl, then on the guests. Let tonight remind us all. Wealth may cover scars, but it can never erase them. And dignity. Dignity belongs to those who carry love, not diamonds. The guests nodded in solemn agreement. The truth had been spoken. The girl rose slowly from her chair, smoothing the folds of her dress. She did not linger for applause. She did not wait for recognition. With a quiet nod, she excused herself from the table, her footsteps steady as she walked away, her head held high. The room followed her with their eyes, knowing they had witnessed something far greater than a dinner party. They had witnessed dignity triumph over cruelty, truth triumph over arrogance. The wealthy woman sank back into her chair, her jewels heavy now, her wealth meaningless in the face of what had been revealed. She would never forget the sight of that handmade dress. She would never forget the silence that had unmade her. And for those who watched, the lesson was clear. Never mock what you do not understand. Never laugh at what carries another's love, another's history, another's strength. Because wealth may dazzle for a moment, but dignity lasts forever. The chandelier's lights glimmered overhead, casting their glow not on the diamonds that once sought attention, but on the memory of a dress stitched by hands that refused to be forgotten. And in that glow lay the truth of the night. Respect cannot be bought, love cannot be mocked, and dignity will always, always rise. Sparkle's moral ending, as Black Voice's style demands. Wealth may shine for a moment, but it is dignity, quiet, unshaken, and rooted in truth, that transforms lives. Never forget where you came from.